Very happy evening to all the viewers and friends. I'm happy to welcome our speaker, Mr. Alan Murray from UK.
Thank
with
you.
With me joining C.A. Chengal Reddy, who is the chairman of the Digital Assurance Committee, and also Abhishek Murli, secretary. In fact, I will say that Excel, whatever we know, is very little in a big ocean, probably only a drop in the ocean. Whenever members used to ask, sir, how much do you know Excel? I used to start, sir, I know 50 to 60%. Next meeting, when somebody asks how much you know Excel, sir, now I know 40%. Next meeting, the percentage came down because when you see things in Excel, you realize that a lot of things you don't know. So this is the only subject where the percentage of learning goes down rather than going up. So you have to cope up and kind of learn tools, and a lot of new tools also which get developed and you have to learn. So with us, we have today a very eminent faculty who is kind of doing a lot of things on Excel, and he will share his knowledge with us. And I know there is no one way of doing things for Excel. There are always 2 or 3 ways where you can do it, and all are right. So the best thing is to see how better you can do it. So likewise, there's no one way of calling speakers. We can call speakers from Chennai, we can call speakers from South India. So we thought, let's call somebody outside India and then try to get their perspective. So thanks to C.A. Deepak, who kind of connected Alan to SARC. A special thanks to him. It is because of him we are able to have Alan with us, and very sure we are going to have a great evening. And I've invited him that someday whenever he comes to India, we'll have a session live at SARC or any other place where he is coming to India. Probably we'll invite him in India also. Before I request C. Abhishek to formally introduce the speaker, I request C.A. Chengal Reddy, who is the chairman of the Digital Assurance Committee of SARC, to speak few words, and then we'll take it over. Chengal, screen is yours.
Thank you, Chairman, for giving me an opportunity to interact and share my thoughts for the today webinar through this webinar. Chairman of SARC of ICA, C.A. Dungarchand Jain, Secretary C.A. Abhishek Murali, today's speaker Mr. Alan Murray, who joined from UK. My dear viewers of the today topic, a pleasant good evening to each one of you. As you all know, this decade has started on a turbulent note and left us with many challenges going forward. The impact of COVID-19, not on just industry, but every individual, has been unprecedented and never seen before. The WHO is of the opinion the COVID will be around for a long time. A vaccine is several months away. So even when lockdown is released, it will be in parts and will come with several restrictions. Today, due to COVID-19, working from home has become the new norm. The age of physical books, vouchers, tax returns, bank payments are way behind us. Almost all regulatory filings are digital. A major part of the business community has moved to electronic accounting. The government is now moving towards faceless assessments, requiring no physical presence and no paper filing. The stakeholders around whom the practice is centered do not require any physical presence. In an office work environment, a firm has one or more servers that host software applications and data. CA firm has to use several software applications for accounting, TDS compliance, GST, income tax return filing, etc. Most CA firms continue to use desktop-based or client-server solutions for this purpose. Although in recent years, there has been the adoption of cloud-based solutions, the ICA committee, that members in practice committee, has been making available several cloud-based solutions to the members, which are very useful to the members so that they can serve these clients very well and very in better manner. Our ICA has achieved recognition as a premier accounting body, not only in the country, but also globally, for maintaining highest standards in technical, ethical areas and for sustaining stringent examination and education standards. Since 1949, the CA profession in India has grown leaps and bounds in terms of members, student base, education and examination of chartered accountancy course, CPA of members, conducting post-qualification courses, formulation of accounting standards, financial reporting review, input on policy matters to the government. The Digital Accounting and Assurance Standard Board for ICA has constituted DAB for fostering a cohesive global strategy on aspects related to digital accounting and assurance through sharing knowledge and practices amongst the members. DAB committee at SIRC also its endeavor to identify, deliberate and highlight on issues in accounting and assurance issues in the digital world. The DAB is focusing on issues in accounting and assurance arising from the high pace of digitization, including use of artificial intelligence in audit, big data analyticals in audit, relevance of sampling, valuation of data as an asset, impairment testing of digital assets, insurance of data, valuation and premium fixation, etc. The board is taking up initiatives to develop knowledge base through position papers and articles on issues relating to impact of technology and on accounting and assurance. The profession of accountancy dependent on MS Excel exceptionally now. When I used to be an intermediate, I inquired with NIT and Aptech at those days to do short-term computer courses. These days, they offered me that DOS, Lotus 123, WinWord, and Fox-based softwares. I still remember that Lotus 123 is similar to MS Excel, which is also a powerful DOS-based application in those days. However, with the advent of MS Excel, other spreadsheets applications such as Lotus 123 disappeared gradually. As a practicing chartered accountant, if you are using MS Excel just for preparing financial statements or computation of income and tax thereon, you are underusing the MS Excel. There is much to do it in Excel, a simple data entry, validated entry, and data entry through Excel applications prepared using macros. Similarly, post data entry, a lot of analysis is possible using these powered applications. The professionals may also use this tool to ease their professional challenges. Using this tool, you can sort the data, filter it, conditional format it, pivot table, prepare charts, use various formulas, get a result using of if conditions, HLOOKUPs, ULOOKUPs, and so on. By using this application, you extremely are enriched with the power of analysis. The only thing you need is its best use. Please keep on update yourself so that you can use MS Excel in your day-to-day professional practices in very effective manner. Mr. Alan Murray is a Microsoft Office trainer and consultant. He has been training and consulting for the past 20 years for business around the world. He is the founder of Computer Gaga and regularly writes on Computer Gaga blog to share tips, tutorials, and templates. I humbly request all of you is to please listen to our expert speaker, Mr. Alan Murray, and enhance your skills. Happy learning to all of you. With this, I conclude my speech. Over to the chairman of SIRC ICA. Thank you, chairman. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chengal. You have put a perfect platform to go forward. Thank you so much. Thank you for covering a lot of initiatives what ICA is doing. And as you rightly said, Excel is always underutilized. As I told you, you have to keep doing and learning. So thank you so much. Abhishek, over to you to formally introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Chairman of SIRC, CA Gundarchand Jain. I also thank my regional council colleague from Hyderabad, CA Chengal Reddy, for giving a very wonderful keynote address before the program started. And of course, I'd like to welcome our guest speaker for the day, Mr. Alan Murray, who is joining us live from the United Kingdom right now. As both the chairman and the keynote speaker Chengal said rightly, Excel is a endless ocean of information. In fact, coincidentally, our chairman happens to be an Excel expert himself. And every time I meet him, I learn a new few trips. I thought I was an expert in Excel till I met chairman. And then when Alan was scheduled to speak, I was going through his YouTube page and I'm seeing there are more videos. I feel like I'm a beginner now again. So I'm really looking forward for today's session. So before I hand over the session to Alan, I'd just like to briefly introduce him. Alan is an expert speaker and an Excel trainer, a YouTuber and freelance writer. He has been helping people in Excel for more than 20 years, and he loves the training and joy he gets from the knowledge in making people's working lives easier. He runs his own blog called Computer Gaga, where he started it casually, and then it has grown into a very, very huge blog today. And he also hosts a monthly Excel meetup in London, where people learn and they share and they learn other people's Excel tips, tools, and their company as well. He has a YouTube channel, as I already said, more than 500 videos, and in fact, more than 57,000 regular followers, and he's got more than 20 million views so far. He regularly contributes to the channel and other various training technologies across the world. We're very lucky to have the presence of such a well-known international speaker to share his experiences with us. Thank you so much, Alan, for joining us today and taking your time out of your schedule to be here with us.
Thank you.
Over to you, Alan.
Thank you.
And get going, Alan, please.
Well, thank you everyone for your lovely introductions and for inviting me to present here. I enjoy any opportunity to talk about Excel. And it's also nice to hear the things you had to say, because it's very much true, and is partly why I do the meetups that I do, because it doesn't matter what level you're at, you're always learning something from someone. Doesn't even have to be an expert. Everyone has something they know which you don't know. So yeah, you're always learning. That's what keeps it fun, I think. I'm just going to share my screen if I can. I've got a few slides of information to show, but then most of it will be hands-on with activities to go through. And the files that I'm using, are they being shared after the presentation? After?
We will try to share it online now, but we shall be sending it to all the participants afterwards.
Yeah, so they'll be available to kind of, practice these things. The screen's just gone blurry.
It's fine now.
Ah, yeah, it went blurry for a moment. Okay, so everybody can see my my PowerPoint. So yes, so in this session, I want to present on two features of Excel, which I don't know if you can call them reasonably new still, but they've not been around forever. And a lot of Excel users still don't necessarily are not aware of them, or are not using them to their full potential. And these two features are Power Query and Power Pivot, all a part of the Power Platform, which Microsoft have now. There are others out there. And I'm going to talk for around an hour now. These two features are huge. So you're heavily encouraged to, to have an adventure beyond today. We're going to learn a lot in this session, hopefully, but also really just to spike the interest for you to go and learn and develop more, because they can do a lot more than what I'm going to demonstrate. For anyone who might be quite new to these, just a few quick things on Power Query. So Power Query is a feature that came out in 2013, and initially it was an add-in, but now it's found within Excel in the native application on the Data tab. And you'll see that when I go through my examples soon. Unfortunately though, when you see it in the Data tab, it's known as Get and Transform. You don't see the words Power Query, which always makes it difficult, when people are trying to learn these things. You hear somebody say Power Query, but in Excel you don't see the words anywhere. But anyway, let's get beyond that. It's an ETL tool, which stands for Extract, Transform and Load. So its job is to get data from somewhere. That could be an Excel spreadsheet, it could be CSV, could be a website, could be a PDF, from whatever this source might be, bring it into either Excel or the kind of model, transform and clean it up, and then load it into your spreadsheet or into a pivot table or something. So it handles an area which, if you look to the past, depending on how long some of you have used Excel, has always been an area where Excel struggled. We've had lots of features like text to columns and find and replace, and obviously formulas, but it's always an area where struggled, and people would use macros because of that to get data from somewhere and clean it up ready for analysis. So it's an amazing tool. This is just a quick little diagram on what I just said. So you've got data coming from different sources, such as a folder or a CSV. It comes into Power Query, and there are tons of transformations we can do to stack them into lists and combine lists and delete stuff we don't want, and then output it into something. That could be a table on a worksheet, but where Power Query really takes its strength is when you put it directly into a pivot table or directly into the data model, otherwise known as Power Pivot, and we're going to see a little bit of that too. Because then you can use Excel beyond the limitations of the 1 million rows it has. And I'm sure some of you have experienced Excel slowing down because of how much data you've got and how many formulas you've written. Using these tools go beyond that. So it's great for anyone who works with huge volumes of data. It will be your best friend. But even if you work with smaller data, it's a really handy tool. So coming out of the slides for a moment, for a first example, hopefully you can all see my Excel screen. Yeah, and it's just a quick, simple example to begin with before we get to some of the more Power Pivot stuff. So I've got some data here, which is quite messy. This is in a file called messy data. So I've just got some pretend sales coming from 3 different stores, and I have some dates. This is in a terrible setup. I can't do any analysis like a pivot table or a sum if or a VLOOKUP. I can't do any of this stuff with this terrible data. So I'm just going to click anywhere. I'll just click in cell A1. It doesn't really matter in this example because it is that bad. I've got blank rows separating my tables. And if I come into the data tab, on the far left, this is Power Query. But as I mentioned, you don't see the words Power Query. I'm using Microsoft 365, this version of Excel. So if you're using a different version of Excel, such as 2016 or 2019, and then your screen might look a little bit different to mine. There'll be similarities, but it may look a bit different. It's an area of Excel that's changed a lot over the years. So I'm in cell A1. If I click on the data tab, on the far left, we have a variety of different sources we can get data from. If I'm just going to click on from table / range here. This get data button has got a variety of awesome sources, including online sources and getting data from a folder, which is very popular, and I'll show that later. For now, I'm just getting it from a table or a range. If I click on that, it's going to come up with a guess of where my data is. Let me know if my screen doesn't look okay. I'll try and zoom in and stuff. It's coming up with that first initial little table. You see, it's just grabbed the first 6 rows. Now my data is a lot more than that, but I want to imagine that it's irregular. It may be 20 rows now, but is it 20 rows next time? And I'd like to, if possible, think towards the future. So I'm just going to put in something silly like 100 for now. Let's imagine there's definitely never more than 100 rows. Let's imagine. And my data doesn't have headers. It's that bad. It's not a normal list structure. The first row was this word sales with a date, and then it goes another word with a date. It's terrible looking. So with this, I'll click OK. And now we begin to see Power Query open up. Up in that top left corner, we now actually do see the words Power Query. This is the Power Query editor. You just don't see it in the Excel environment. But once you get here, you now know why we call it that. Now this is opened as a separate window on top of Excel. You can see my messy data in the middle, and I loaded in 100 rows. So I've got a lot of extra rubbish at the bottom. But I was thinking towards the future when I did that. Over on the right-hand side, one of the best things about Power Query is that we have the opportunity to name it, but more importantly, we have this applied steps area. And I've only got 2 steps at the moment, the connection to the data on the worksheet, and then this change type step, which occurs quite a lot. Now, everything we do in here is going to be recorded as a step. So for anyone who's done macros before, there's kind of similarities. You can think of it as recording a macro. That's how you can kind of think of it. So in the future, we can just click refresh, like we do with our pivot tables, and Power Query repeats all the steps again. So there's lots of powerful, complex stuff we can do in here. But even if you're doing simple, basic stuff, the fact that we are kind of streamlining in that task for something you might do every Friday is incredible. Saves loads of time, loads of issues. Now, I just want to go through a few transformations here. At the top, you can see I have a few tabs. There's tons of functionality. We're limited on time, so I won't be going through too many of those. But the good news is a lot of them will be familiar to you, either because you're an Excel user or because the words are quite nice. So along the top, you can see buttons like remove rows, and you've got your typical sorts buttons and your split and replace values. It's all stuff we're probably familiar with. There are also ones like advanced editor and merge queries and stuff that we might not be familiar with. But a lot of the stuff is quite basic, but you're recording these repetitive actions. And that's what this example is going to go through, which I'm going to go through in a reasonable speed here. So with this first column selected, I'll try and zoom in and out. Hopefully I'm working this okay. What we need to do is we need to separate the date from that word sales. I can't do analysis on the date while it's stuck next to a piece of text. So with that column selected, I know it's selected because it's green. Up on the ribbon above, there is a split column button, just like text to columns, although it's more powerful because we have options like delimiter, but we've also got digit to non-digit, going from number to text or uppercase to lowercase, stuff that you don't get that in text to columns. And to do it with a formula would be quite difficult, although it is possible. So we're going to click on by delimited, but there's tons of functionality here. If I click on by delimited, a window will appear asking me what the delimiter is. It assumes that I'd like a space. I'm going to change that to custom because what I want is a colon followed by a space. That is what separates the word sales from the date. I then get the option of leftmost, rightmost, or every occurrence of those characters. I will leave it as each occurrence, but you can probably imagine how choosing a setting here can make a big difference to your data. If I click OK, that will be the first transformation done. And you can see we have this second column with those dates separated. And over on the right-hand side, it has been added as a applied step to split by the delimiter, and then this other change type step came in. I want to try and ignore them a little bit for today because of our time constraints, but I could delete that. I don't really need it right now. But every time you do something like remove a column or split a column, Power Query will check your data and change its type. So in that example, because I had the date, I can see this date icon in the corner of the header because it recognized it was a date, just like Excel can, which is useful, but you get a lot of those steps which are not always that necessary. Okay, I want to split now by this store name and the ID. So if I click on that column, back up to split column, by delimiter again. Once again, this window appears. It's custom again, and it's going to be a space hyphen space, which are the characters in between the name of the store and what we're pretending is the store ID. Each occurrence, again, there's only one, so it doesn't really make a difference what we choose, but obviously with your data, it might be a big difference. If I click OK, it's the same again. So now we have 4 columns, column for the ID, column for the date. Here's our sales values. Okay, the next thing I'd like to do is with these dates, what we ultimately need is these sales values. We need those in different rows so that we can do our analysis on them, but I'll need the date next to it, you know, in a typical spreadsheet form. So with the column with the dates selected, up on the ribbon, we're going to the Transform tab, where there's a button called Fill, which is the same as it is in Excel. When you drag that little square to copy formulas, that's the fill handle. We're going to fill down, and that will fill in all the gaps with the date. So now I have the date next to those numbers, which I want to calculate. By the way, as I do each of these steps, they're added on the right-hand side, and you can see my formula bar here is writing this code. So a little bit like the VBA that Macro Recorder does. If you don't see that code on your Power Query window, you can click on the View tab and show the formula bar, because in Power Query, the formula bar is not shown as a standard rule. So when you first use it, you won't see that. And they do that because you don't need it. Unless you do more advanced transformations, most people don't need to get involved with that code. But it's there if you progress to those levels. And it's called the M language, M for mashup. Okay, we need some more transformations done. We have these filter arrows in the column headers. I'm going to use the filter arrow in the first column because I want to get rid of the blank rows, which are our null values. I want to get rid of the word sales, or the whole row this will be, not just that word. Also the totals, because the pivot table will do that, and also the store. So really everything apart from the actual store names. This will start to make a big difference now. As I click OK, it's really beginning to take shape. I've filtered those out. So now we can see we have the ID, the store name, the date, and we need to sort those values out, but we're getting very close to a normal looking table or list that you'd have in Excel. Clicking on this last column, now we're going to deal with those values. It's back to the Home tab, back to Split Column, and back to By Delimiter. Because although they called it Split Column, this is going to detect what they call a line feed. So the fact that someone has started a new line within the cell. And it's detected that line feed. Each occurrence is important now because there's 2 of them in those cells. But instead of splitting them into columns in this advanced section, I want rows. And if I click OK, now we have this. And this is what we want. The final touches really are to rename the headers, because those header names are shocking, and to check the data types and the name. So if I quickly do that, if I double click a header, just like you would double click a sheet tab to rename sheets, or name that one store. This one can be ID. This one can be date. And the last one can be sales. You would check the data types. So this little button in the corner, the first one is text, that's good. Second one is whole numbers, that's good. Next one's date. And the last one is whole numbers, which works, I guess. But I could click on that button and I get the different data types I can handle. And I can switch it to a currency, which will bring in a fixed decimal place. There's some really useful options in here, especially locale if you're dealing with international number formats, such as dates from the US and numbers coming out of Europe, where they look different to how they would in the UK. But that's important. You may be based in a certain country, whether it's India, whether it's the UK, whether it's Canada, but that may not be where your data came from. And it's just instructing Power Query here, this is the data I've got, because your default settings will come from your regional settings. This is all good though, but you specify the data type. On the far right-hand side, I'm going to give this query a nice name. Instead of table 1, let's just call it sales. And if you don't mind repeating myself for one last time, all of those steps are added on the right. I could tidy those up, but I don't want to spend too much time on here. I'm just doing an example, quite a simple example, although lots of transformations going on here, of cleaning up a horrible looking piece of data. In the top left corner of the Home tab, I can now close and load this. So close and load too. And this is where we get the different options that I mentioned on my PowerPoint slides. I can load it into a table and a worksheet and use Excel, whether I want sum if or whether I want pivot tables. I could load it into a pivot table, or I can load it into the data model, which is our Power Pivot. So this is great. This data has come from an Excel sheet already, but imagine it came from an external place. We can take it into Power Query, load it straight into a pivot table, and it doesn't even reach the worksheet, which is brilliant if you're working with larger sets of data. For this first example, I'll load it as a table. I'll put it on an existing worksheet. I'll just put it here in cell E1 next to the data I've got, and I'll click OK. And this will load it in. I have the query on the right-hand side as it's now connected to that data. And I've got a clean set of data that I could easily use to sum these values or sum if Bristol or whatever we want to do, whatever skills we have, whatever desires we have in Excel. Just to show that off, if I clicked inside that table and quickly inserted a pivot table from that, and just put that on this same worksheet for the moment, then now I can easily analyze my data by store. I could bring store into rows, sales into the values. If I move some of these windows out of the way for a moment, and now I've got the total for every store. Information that I didn't have in the original data set. You know, I have to add those three up and then go to the next three, and you know, I needed to clean that data up. And Power Query makes that simple. If our data was to suddenly increase for some reason, if I just copy this last date, so you can imagine a more realistic situation here if you want, that you've just exported from a system, this is the data it produces. And in here, if I just change the date to the 6th, and I'll just change one of the numbers. At the moment, I do not see the 6th appear in the Power Query table. But if I come up to my data tab, the refresh button and refresh all, just like your pivot tables, now I can see a clean version of that data is taken out. And if I come over to my pivot table, I'm not sure if that refreshed or not. No, it didn't. And with a refresh, that data. So they're all connected to each other. And I didn't have to go through any of that whole process again, rewriting formulas or filtering or sorting, stuff that's not necessarily difficult, but it's manual. And if you're doing that daily or weekly, you know, there's better ways of working. There's more efficient ways of working. So that's my first example. It's a kind of little introduction to Power Query. I realize it might be fast for those who are new to this, just presenting, you know, might have been a bit of a whirlwind there. Hopefully we're learning stuff, but also because of the time permitted, it's just knowing what is possible, you know, which is sometimes part of the battle in Excel. If you know it can be done, you can find it. And you know Power Query can do it, so you have an idea what you can search for on Google or whatnot. It's an incredible tool. Okay. Now, I'm going to go through another example of Power Query, I think. A bit wary of time. Actually, let's go into a Power Pivot thing. We can always come back to when our time is. Now, Power Query, you can see, works completely on its own. And out of these two features, I would argue that every Excel user can benefit from Power Query. Everyone can. It's so useful. Now, the feature called Power Pivot is much more specific. A lot of Excel users just won't need it. But if you're dealing with large data sets and you want to do complex analysis, Power Pivot's incredible. And I'll show that now. I'll show the two working together. So that's Power Query on its own. Let me close that file down. Let's not worry about saving that. And I'm just going to come from a completely blank Excel workbook, because what I have here is in the files that I've shared. So this is the files that I've shared with everybody. I have this folder called sales. And in this folder called sales, I have some CSV files. So now I've got much more sales data. I've got them coming from different regions, and they've all been sent to me or downloaded or whatever the process was into a folder as separate CSV files. But I need them all together in one list to then analyze. What I've also got is a file called products with information about the products we sold, and a text file called reps, which has come from the personnel department or something, which has got information about the reps. And they've all come as separate files, but I need to combine them for analysis. Now, if I switch back to my PowerPoint for a moment, because Power Pivot is a feature that came out in 2010. Once again, it came out as an add-in and wasn't native in Excel until 2016. And it's also known as the data model. So you saw the words data model when I created a pivot table. If you hear the words model or data model or Power Pivot, they're talking about the same thing. So what Power Pivot is, it's a modeling tool. It enables us to create more efficient models if you work with huge amounts of data. You can handle millions of rows of data. It can relate them, so no lookup formulas like VLOOKUP needed. We can apply filter context, which is quite an advanced topic, and also DAX, which can also get advanced. But it has its own formula language, which is very rich and much larger than the formula language you get in Excel, the normal one, the worksheet formulas. So this is a classic scenario of somebody dealing with the data which I'm about to use with Power Pivot. Is they'll have a file or a worksheet with the sales information, and I've got another file or worksheet with product information, and they're using a VLOOKUP here, or an index match or an XLOOKUP to fetch the information about the product and bring it into that worksheet so they can create a pivot table from it, because you want everything in one sheet. That's not what we're going to do in Power Pivot, because we're duplicating the price here. If I've got a sales list of, let's say I've got 50,000 sales, I'm going to have 50,000 VLOOKUPs bringing back price. And I can see here I've got £2.80 mentioned multiple times, possibly hundreds of times, which is not an efficient way of working. It works, and if your spreadsheets aren't that big, then we don't care so much. It's going to work fine. Excel is powerful. But at some point, Excel is going to start crashing and slowing down, and it's not the optimal way of working. This is the optimal way of working. This is what we're going to create. Keep the information in their separate areas and relate them. So we won't bring the information into the sales table. We'll simply refer to it via a relationship, and this is our model. So I have a blank Excel file. I'm coming over to the data tab because we're going to use Power Query to go and get the external data and bring it in to the model. And I'm starting with the button called Get Data. because the first option I want is this brilliant from file option. I have 4 files in one folder for different regions. I want to bring them all in. I want to connect Excel to that folder. So also, if anybody adds more files to that folder, Power Query will automatically just work off that. Or I say automatically, on refresh, will work off that. If I click on From Folder, it's probably not a surprise. It asks me where it is. If I click on Browse, I'll navigate to this folder. I put it on my desktop in this PQ and PP. That's the name of the folder I sent you guys. And this sales folder is the one. I click on OK. It puts the path in. See, this is on my OneDrive. And I'll click OK. So if that's a shared drive at your workplace or wherever it is, doesn't really matter. It could be a USB stick. But you're connecting to that area, that exact file path. And it lists all of the files in there. We know I have these 4 because I showed you, but it could have a lot more than that. And we've got information such as the date they were modified, the extension of the file, the type of the file, information we might be interested in. At the bottom, I've got a few buttons. The most important one there is transform data. I could click on combine and combine all 4 of those files into one list right now. I could also just load those files as they are, like the names of them, into a spreadsheet, just to keep a log of files that I'm receiving. But clicking transform will take us into Power Query. And you're always encouraged to do that as a general rule of thumb, because even if you think your data's okay.
If I may interrupt, Alan, if you can just zoom the screen a little, people are not able to see it. You can zoom the screen a little more.
Sure. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Sure.
A little more of zooming the screen. Is it possible?
Yeah, I could go again. Is that okay?
No, it is still small actually. It is still small. People are not able to see it.
Not able to see that. Can you see it zooming though?
Yeah, zoom in a little more.
Okay, it's zoomed in. I mean, that's pretty intense. Yeah, is it okay?
It has not changed on the screen. 1 second.
It's not changed.
Yeah, it is not changed.
So can you see it zooming as I work now? Can you see it changing? Oops, not that.
Okay, I think we'll continue. Somebody has put that you can zoom from your phone actually, so that will take care of things. You can zoom the screen of the screen, so that will take care. We'll proceed, Alan. Thank you.
Okay. So what I was doing now, I was using the Windows tool called the magnifier. This tool here. I was using the shortcuts to zoom in and zoom out with that. So I don't know if that's working for you or not. But yeah, this Power Query window, I can't zoom in it like I can the Excel sheets. So I have to use this feature or a similar feature to do that. Just minimize that toolbar. But here I've got all the files from that area. If I needed to, which I don't right now, I could use the filters to avoid certain files. So if you had a folder of files, but you only wanted this month's, or you only wanted the Excel files, I can use these filters to narrow that down. I'm going to use them all for now. So this button in the header of the content column is your combine files button. And I'm going to click on that button to stack the content of all 4 of those CSVs into one big list. As soon as I click that button, it will show me a preview of the first file. And I'm just going to click OK to proceed with combining. Here it comes. And now we have one list, one query, one table, whatever word somebody wants to use. You see these words interchanged at times, of all 4 of those files in one. Now, as I do that, on the left-hand side, I have this queries pane. Now we can expand or collapse that queries pane. And it might look a little bit scary because there's quite a lot of stuff in there. But all this stuff above sales, we don't really care about. So I'm going to collapse that to hide it for now. But these are queries that Power Query did to do the job for you, creating functions, creating parameters. And if you get to an advanced level, you can go in and deal with those, which is useful. Most people don't need that level, and they'll hide it so that it doesn't distract them or worry them. And we just deal with the query that we've got called sales. On the far right hand side, we have the query settings with a bunch of applied steps, invoking those functions and all that stuff on the left hand side, which we'll just ignore, but they are steps that we could potentially change or delete if we needed to. But a good thing here is it does it all for you. I say, just like a macro recorder records code when you press a button, so that you don't need to worry about that, but you could. Okay, just a few simple changes in here to clean up this data. It's pretty good already, but in this first column, we have the name of the CSV files, but I don't want the extension CSV. So with that column selected, on the Home tab, a button to replace values. And if I click replace values, which is the find and replace of Power Query, I can ask it to look for a CSV. Oh, let's try that again. .csv, and to replace with nothing. I basically just want to delete that content. I don't need it. If I click OK, that will tidy up that. And with the column still selected, coming to the Transform tab, there is a Format button where I can change the case of that content to capitalize each word. So I have a capital E for East. And you see how simple it is to tidy up this data without needing the upper function or flash fill or any technique you might know in Excel. I can rename that header something useful like region. I can even click and drag it into a different position of this table. Maybe I want it after the product name. I would check the name of the query on the far right. It's called sales. I think I'm happy with that. And I would check the data types. So we have number for the ID, date, text for product, text again, whole number for store. Then we've got another whole number and text. So everything's okay, but it's always good practice to do that. Check the name of the query, name of the headers, check your data types before you go loading that somewhere. Now here comes the interesting thing maybe, is I'm coming over to the Home tab, close and load to. And the interesting bit is that I'm loading it as a connection only. So this data is coming from files outside the spreadsheet, 4 of them in a folder. And normally we work with data in a spreadsheet. I can even load it into a pivot table, but I'm loading it as connection only. The data is not going to physically be in this spreadsheet. And that will keep this file slim and fast, even if I've got 500,000 or 2 million rows of data. Yes, it will get bigger, but nowhere near the physical constraints and the ability of Excel alone. I'm also going to tick the box to add to the data model, and that is Power Pivot. So it's going to be available to our pivot tables, and we'll see that soon. If I click OK, I will see the query being loaded on the right hand side, and I can see there are 7,000 rows that have been loaded. So this data is not that big, but it could easily have been a lot bigger than that. Remember, you can hide these other queries in case it gets a bit cluttered or scary. But that query is loaded, but you do not physically see it. It's just stored in the model at the moment. We'll see it soon. Before then, though, I want to load in 2 more tables of information. So let's try and do that quite quick. From text CSV on data. The next one is a CSV file. It's called products. Opens up this window for me to look at my data. I'm going to transform data as is encouraged. Power Query opens. I realize I'm going through this reasonably quick. This data is pretty much perfect. I'm just going to change the data type to currency for the price. Everything else about it is absolutely okay. There's already a change type step in here, so it's just asking me whether I want to change the existing step or create an additional one. I'm going to replace the current one. Just warning you that it might affect how it works. It's not going to affect this one. With that done, close and load 2, connection only, data model. So repeating what I did before, and I'm about to do it one more time. That's loaded. Back to from text CSV. This time it's a text file called reps. Open the window so I get a preview. Transform data. In Power Query, I could do loads of transformations and fancy stuff, but I don't need to. One thing I do need to do with this is because it's come from a text file, the headers are in the first row. So what I can do is up on the Home tab, I have this button to use first row as headers, and that will promote them into the header area. Check my data types, all good. Close and load 2. Connection, model, okay. So a little bit repetitive there, while I went through a little bit quicker, but the end result is that only as connections, and in the model, I have 3 tables of information. I have a transaction table called sales with all the transactions of all the sales that I've been making. And then I've got 2 what they call lookup tables or dimension tables, information about products, information about sales reps. Now this is all in the model. I cannot see it anywhere on this sheet. But if I come up to my Insert tab and insert a pivot table, look at this. It immediately detects that I have a data model. Do you want to create a pivot table from the data model? And that's what Power Pivot is. It's just pivot tables, normal pivot tables, but from queries in the model. And we can use DAX and all that other extra stuff. That's all Power Pivot. But essentially, in a nutshell, it's pivot tables from model. And I'll put it in the existing worksheet, A1, yes, yes, yes. Click OK. Pivot table looking normal. But over on the right, it might look a bit different over there, because I can see this little icon indicating that these tables are from the model. Now let's look at it, if we can do some analysis here. If I expand products, and if I drag product name, or just product, into rows, I get all the products from that products table. Now, if I open up the sales table, and if I drag the units sold into the values area to be summed, when I look over at the pivot table, oh, that's not working. 167,000, they've all got the same, and the grand total also has the same. And looking back over to the field list warns me no relationships. So I've got the 3 tables in the model, but at the moment, they're not connected in any way. They don't understand each other. And this is what people would normally do with a VLOOKUP. bringing data from products table into sales table to then do the pivot table. I've kept them separate, but at the moment they don't know about each other. So this is where we need Power Pivot. Now there is a Power Pivot tab up on my ribbon. And if you don't have that Power Pivot tab, you can bring it in by clicking File and Options. And then we can come into add-ins. If you've already installed the add-in, you just need to customize the ribbon. But you'll probably need to come into COM add-ins. And in this little window, just make sure you tick Power Pivot and click OK. And then that tab will appear at the top. Even if you don't have that tab, Power Pivot is actually available on the Data tab as well. So your normal Data tab, over on the right near Data Validation, there's a button for relationships and a button to manage the data model. That's Power Pivot. So there is a Power Pivot tab, but you can get into Power Pivot without that tab as well. So if I click that button on Data, so I'm not even using the Power Pivot tab and the COM add-in, now I'm in the Power Pivot window. It tells me that at the top, Power Pivot for Excel. So a separate window, I've still got Excel open, got Power Pivot open on top, and it takes me to what's known as the data view. I can see the 3 worksheets at the bottom, sales, products, reps. They look like worksheets, they're not worksheets. So they make it look like Excel, which is nice for Excel users, but it's also a little bit misleading. They do not function anything like a worksheet, apart from you can click on them. That bit's like a worksheet, but they're separate queries. And you do not go clicking or trying to change these cells. You can't do that. That's not how it works. It's quite a different beast. And that's why I say there's a lot more exploration to do after this presentation. This is just an insight. What we do need to do at the moment is up on the ribbon, change from data view to diagram view so that we can establish those relationships. Here are the 3 tables. We can drag these around and organize them and resize them, something nice. Normally people would put the transactional table at the bottom, like sales, and the products and reps tables, the lookup tables, above. So the sales table is the story. That's why we're in business, that's what we do. The products and reps are the characters of that story. I'm going to sell a product and I'm going to have a rep that sells it. They're going to be information that, characters of that story is a way of thinking about it. We need to relate them. We can do that by clicking and dragging, and there's a few other techniques. So if I drag from this product field in sales, click and drag from product up to product ID in products, it's going to create a relationship between those 2 tables because those are the 2 keys. Now I know that because I know this data. You guys are seeing it maybe for the first time, but that product column in sales is also an ID. So it's just like using VLOOKUP to do a lookup value, which will be the product in sales, that's the lookup value. And then product ID is the leftmost column of the table array. Products is the table array, if you get what I mean. Returning column 4, which is the price, all that jazz. But we're just connecting those 2 IDs. I'm now going to do the same for reps. It's SPID. That's the column that I know, over to ID. They will recognize each other. Relationship created, one-to-many symbols, and that arrow is the filtered context. Very important topic as you progress into Power Pivot, or if any of you know Power BI, same thing really. Power BI uses the Power Pivot engine. Okay, with the relationships done, I'm going to keep the Power Pivot window open, But if I switch back to the Excel window, it's working. Now I have the relationships. That pivot table I created before is working wonderfully. Brilliant. And I no longer have the message complaining on the right. Even better, if I was to quickly take a copy of that pivot table, I just did that by clicking and dragging with my control key down. And I can change product for a rep. So I'm using information from the other table. Now I've got the totals for each sales rep. So all three tables, I'm now working in my normal pivot tables, but they're related. I haven't had to use VLOOKUPs and stuff to bring in loads of columns into one monster list in order for this to work. How are we doing for time?
We have time. If you'd like to take questions, we can keep another 15 to 20 minutes.
Okay, if I could just do like another 10 to 15 maybe.
No, we have an hour's time. So if you could wrap up after like 40 minutes, you can take 40 minutes if you like.
Okay, that's some time. Okay, tell me when you want me to stop talking. Because at the moment, you know, something I didn't want to get too involved with, but definitely need to mention is DAX, the formula language. So I have created a sum of the units sold here for these two tables, and that is known as an implicit measure. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. That's working absolutely fine. But it's not the most efficient way of working. So you might hear people complain about that use, but it does work. Don't listen too much to that nonsense. But it is called an implicit measure, and it's not the best way of working, especially if you're creating lots of reports. So what we're going to do is come into Power Pivot and write some DAX, just a little bit, to create our own measures, and then use those instead. Because I can do units sold without any DAX. There it is, I've done it, yay. But there's also things in here which I don't have. For example, I don't have the revenue because I've got this sales table with units sold, and then I've got the price of the products in the products table. But to find the revenue, I need to multiply those two numbers and then add them up. And I don't have that as a column in my data set. So I need to create that column, and that is DAX. Just like you'd use a sum if or something in or some product in Excel. Now for this, there's different ways of creating these measures, but especially when you're starting, the easiest way is on the Power Pivot tab. There is a measures button, and to create them this way. You might see some people go into the data model, because on the data view at the bottom underneath the list, this area down here, this is called the calculation area, and our measures will be visible down there. We also have this formula bar. Now, and I could use that formula bar to create these measures, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when you're first starting out, it's just a little bit, there's a little bit more to know. So what I'm going to do instead is in Excel, staying in Excel, don't even need that window open, Power Pivot measures button, new measure. And we get this little window up here asking for the table where we're going to store our measure. Is it sales, products, or reps? Well, sales is the transaction table. What do I want to call my measure? Well, I think for the first measure, I'm just going to recreate what we've already got, which is to sum the units sold. So I'm going to call it total units. That will do. I could write a description, but yeah, we all know what that does. And in this box for the formula. Now the text here is quite small. You can zoom in on that box by holding down the control key and rolling the mouse wheel. That could be a nice way of scrolling in on that, even on your own screens, because it's so tiny. So I can make that text a bit bigger. And you're probably expecting this good old sum function. Now, for those of you who might be new to Power Pivot and DAX, good thing to notice, there's a function called sum, just like there is in Excel. There's also a function called substitute, just like there is in Excel. However, there's also a function called isSubtotal, substitute of index, summarize columns, and SUMX, and none of those are in Excel. So there are similarities. There's functions called left and if and things like this, and concatenate, but there's also lots more. It's a very rich, a very powerful language. There's a lot going on here. Anyway, we're just doing a normal sum function. It will ask for the column name to sum, and I'm going to reference the sales table. As I'm typing, it scans through the list and the units sold column. And then I can just close off my bracket like you do with your normal Excel worksheet functions. I can press this check formula button and I get this nice little message telling me that I didn't make any errors. I knew that. It just feels nice though when they tell you that message. I just click it to feel nice. But then what's really good is at the bottom here, you get some formatting options. So I'm assuming a lot of you have used pivot tables before. And if you've got more than one pivot table, and if you drag in a number to a pivot table, then you drag in one to another pivot table, you have to format them. You know, and you'd have to format each individual one. One of the positives of these measures is that we can format them in advance. So I could say that this is a number and it's a whole number. And yes, I'll have a 1000 separator. And I can do this formatting so that when I reuse it in a pivot table, it's already formatted. It's ready to go. I could use it 10 times. I wouldn't have to format anything. I know it's consistent. It's going to save me time. It's going to make it easier for other people who maybe don't know Excel as good as us. So it's brilliant. It also means it only calculates once. One measure, one calculation. Those implicit measures that you drag into pivot tables, if I drag it into 5 pivot tables, it's 5 calculations. And that's why it was working fine, but measures are a lot more efficient, especially if you've got big models. One calculation used many times rather than calculation at pivot, calculation at pivot, calculation at pivot. Now you can see I've got the exact same numbers, although these ones are formatted, the other ones aren't. Yes, I could format them by going right-click number format, but I'd have to go and do that over here as well, right-click number format. This is all done ahead of time. So I could, in this pivot table, get rid of the other one. I could also click on the other pivot table and get rid of it and replace it with my measure. And in the field list, there's the measure with the little FX button. I can drag that in, and now it's in both, and it's already formatted. Same answers as before, but this time I've created the measure in advance because I knew I was going to use it in analysis, and I'm setting up my model ready to be used in the future. Excellent. I think we'll do another DAX calculation. Power Pivot tab, measures, new measure. Now for this one, I wanted to find out, so I know how many units we sold, but I want to know how many transactions. So, you know, a transaction may have been for 15 things, but I don't want 15, that's one. How many different orders did we take? So I'm going to put this in the sales table. I'm going to put number of orders as the name of the measure. And for the DAX calculation, I'm going to use a function called count rows. Just like before, you might recognize count and count A and count blank because you get them in Excel. but you won't recognize, unless you've done some DAX, count AX or count rows or count X or distinct count, because you don't get those in Excel. It's a very powerful language, goes beyond the standard Excel, which is when you need Power Pivot. It's count rows. Now this one asks me for a table. You can see in this little box, it asks for a table. So interesting that the previous DAX function, by the way, DAX, DAX is data analysis expressions. That's what it stands for. And the previous one asked us for a column name, and we gave it the number of units. This one asked us for a table. So some ask you for columns, others ask you for tables. Just like in normal formulas. You know, VLOOKUP asks you for a table array, whereas others might ask you for a column or for a cell, one cell. Anyway, now the table is called sales. So I'm not going to set a column, just that table, sales. Close bracket, I can do my formatting. This is another whole number. 1,000 separator, because there was about 7,000 of them. Click OK. Now, because at the moment I'm on the cell saying Jacqueline, so that pivot table is active, the measure got added to that pivot table because that pivot table was active. If I'd clicked on a blank cell, it wouldn't have added to the pivot tables. It would just be in the field list on the right. Now, something that some people might find difficult when they're starting out with Power Pivot is that you can write a measure saying how many transactions. So you'd expect one answer, like a sum function in Excel. But it immediately, you know, there's that filter context, that topic called filter context. As soon as you put it in the pivot table, that is filtered by Christie. You know, that filter takes place. And that is what these arrows are indicating. The fact that the DAX was able to go through the reps table. Remember that little arrow is the filter context? Filter for Christie through the pivot table, come out and only sum the right amount of units or only count the rows relating to Christie. So that filter context is an important topic, not necessarily difficult, but it can be sometimes awkward for Excel people to get their head around because they may not have thought of things in that way in the past, depending on their experience. Their experience is limited to Excel. Excel has not normally behaved in that way. We write our formulas based on cells. Okay, I've got the number of orders in there if I'm interested. So total units, but also how many separate orders they took. Now, I want one more DAX measure, which is for the total revenue, where I mentioned that the number of units is in the sales table, but the price is in the products table. So I'm going to do an extra, a little bit more to our DAX measure this time. Exciting is what it is. New measure. Okay, sales table. I'm going to name it total revenue. And for this, I'm using a function called SUMX. So functions that have an X on the end are known as iterator functions. And the brilliance of this function is it will, it tells you in there, if you can see that, evaluate for each row. So it's going to come down the sales table, every different row in that sales table, it's going to iterate down them. That's what the X's can do. They don't just look at a column, they look at that each individual row, work down it, and every time it hits a row, I'm going to get it to multiply the price from products and the units sold in sales. Each row, multiply them, remember it. Next row, multiply them, remember it. So when it's finished, it can sum them. So some of you might know sum product, so it's like that, but more. Because although we're multiplying, you can do any expression, any calculation. Excellent. So it's a SUMX function. 2 questions, what table and expression? The table is sales, comma, the expression. Now I need the price and the products table. I know I've said this quite a few times, but here I say it again. Normally people would use a VLOOKUP or an index match or something like that to go and get that price and bring it in ready for analysis to be used by another formula or something. In DAX, we have a function that kind of behaves in that way called related. It's going to follow the relationship we've got between the 2 tables. So I don't have to give it the lookup value or anything because it knows all that stuff through the relationship. And I'm going for the product price, products table, and then the column name in the square brackets price. Close bracket for related, multiplied by sales table, total units. Now, something you might be thinking at the moment is that this measure is in the sales table. So why did I mention sales when I'm already in that table? You wouldn't do that in an Excel formula. You wouldn't write a formula on sheet 1 and in that formula tell it to look at sheet 1. You could do, but it makes no sense. Now in DAX, it does make some sense. We don't need it, but the reason we do that is because measures look like this. Measures have the name of the measure with square brackets around them. That's what they look like. And because they look the same, you're always told that when you reference a column, always put the table name before the column, even if you're in that table. You know, here I wasn't in it, so it was very important. Here, it works without it, but you should always do it because then other people looking at your formulas will look and go, oh, that's a column. And they'll know because the table name is preceding it. Close bracket for sum X. This is a currency format. I should check my formula really, shouldn't I? Let's check that formula. Yes. Currency, you can choose whatever currency symbol you want, decimals, let's say no decimals, all that stuff, click OK. And because that's active, it's been added automatically to the pivot table. So we've got 3 measures, just exploring, like putting our toes in the water for some DAX there. All of these added on the right-hand side in the sales table, the FX symbol next to what they call a measure, basically a calculation. Okay, all in our pivot tables. So, other things that we might already be aware of, but let me do a quick little demo on here. On this second pivot table, the one with the sales reps, let's bring in the total revenue. A feature that I'm sure we appreciate in Excel is conditional formatting. And now that I've got this pivot table, maybe I want to do some conditional formatting so that any sales rep that's hit the target, and our pretend target, let's say it's 12,000. Anyone who's achieved 12,000, I want to know about. So I'm going to click on one of these cells, Home tab, normal conditional formatting, and I'm going to come into New Rule. This is how I do it, because I want to create an icon set. Now, because I'm in a pivot table, I don't know if you guys have used conditional formatting with pivot tables before, but you get these extra settings at the top. Now, I want to make sure I choose this last one, only format the cells for the revenue and for the rep. Because if I choose the second one, then it's going to include the grand total as well. And that doesn't make any sense. So say ignore that. All of them for the revenue and the rep. Also, I'm avoiding selecting cells. So if this pivot table gets bigger, it's going to dynamically grow with it. What am I going to do? I'm using an icon set. I'll use these circles. Let's change percent to number. And I said 15,000, I think. So a green circle if they have achieved 15,000 or more. I get to specify conditions for the amber and for the red, but I might actually switch those icons off. I don't care. I just want to know if they've hit target. I don't care about anything else. Click OK, and now I've got a nice conditional formatting rule. Why has it not done it to these? Oh, I said 15, didn't I? I meant 12. Never mind. 15 will do. Yes, only the ones that hit that target have gone green. Excellent. So conditional formatting, just as you may know it, now applied. Let me save this file. I don't want something to go wrong in this last bit. Let's stick this on my desktop. But for a quick demo, sales PP. What I want to do is remember the origins of this Power Pivot kind of model that we've created. What's going on there? That we got 4 CSV files from that folder. We also got a text file for the reps. We got a products file, which was CSV. We created relationships between them. We then created 3 DAX calculations, and we built all these on top. Suddenly, let me go to my files. A new file has come in. The business has expanded. We have a new CSV called Northwest. I'm going to move that Northwest file, where's cut, into this sales folder. Let's just paste that in there. So now I've got a new file that was not there when we set that up. Northwest is here. Let's come back to Excel. Let's change one of the pivot tables so that we can see it. Let's bring in the region. So working, here we go. Just a little bit slow on my machine. So now I've got this analysis, the region, and then the product's been sold in that region. But there's no Northwest, only the 4 that I already have. Let's come up to the data tab, refresh all. This is going to refresh those connections to that folder. Oh, something's happening. And now there's Northwest. Our pivot table is coming with a Northwest data, and you might have noticed Audrey and Cindy came in. They weren't there a minute ago, and that suddenly appeared. So all that work, we connected Power Query to that folder. If people are emailing you files and you go and save in that folder, refresh your queries, and your dashboard, your model here and that is going to work immediately off that data. Absolutely terrific. 2 simple pivot tables here. Could have gone a lot further with that, especially in the DAX and stuff. But just giving you an idea that we're kind of automating, although we have to click refresh, but definitely streamlining particular processes. So I'm sure you're getting files from different people, different clients, or even different systems, databases that you've got regularly. And when you're working with that kind of thing, I mean, Power Query it's absolute gold dust. It's arguably the best feature to appear in Excel in at least 20 years. Power Pivot, not as many people need. It's a bit more niche, but hopefully you've seen it here. Working with huge volumes of data, really powerful calculations, much better than using lookup formulas to combine data. Okay. I have another example to go through if needed, but did you want me to handle some questions?
Yeah, Alan, there are a few questions. We'll take it in the end. You're done with?
Sorry, say again?
There are a few questions. We'll take it in the end, or we'll take it right now.
I don't mind. How much longer did I have for?
You can go for 20 more minutes, 20-25 minutes more. You can go.
Okay. Didn't expect that much time. Okay, let me do one more example then, and then we'll see if I can answer as many questions as I can. Let me try and save this file again. It didn't seem to work last time. Just in case anybody wants a copy. Okay, it's worked that time. Won't worry about my sign in right now. Okay, I have a file named group by, CSV file. And I'm going to do this from a blank Excel workbook. This is an example that I was going to do earlier, but I skipped it just in case I didn't have enough time. So I wanted to make sure I covered the Power Pivot stuff. But this is going back to Power Query because I wanted to show that Power Query, although it can't do as much as Power Pivot in this side, it can also create reports or create pivot tables, if you want to call them that. So if I just come into my data tab and from text /CSV, because it's a CSV file with this, let's navigate to it, desktop, PQPP, group by. So once again, the data's not in Excel. I'm keeping it outside Excel and bringing it into a model. Now, there's nothing wrong with putting it in Excel, don't misquote me, but imagining huge data and all that stuff, keep it separate. It's going to be a much more efficient, faster model if you struggle with kind of speed and stuff. It just shows me what it looks like, which is reasonably horrendous. If I click on transform data, Power Query will take care of this. What I've got here is some mileage, and I just want to create some reports totaling mileage. I've got some staff doing various mileage on various jobs on various dates. So I see I have some names here, such as Pedro and Anne and Eduardo. I've got dates they traveled and what job they visited. And I've got the totals over on the right. I've even got the total here, like, is that Pedro, whoever this is, has done 100 miles. But that's horrible, you know, to have to work with that. So we'll get Power Query to do this. Now, something of interest here. First of all, don't need these two columns. I have a blank column 2 and a blank column 4. I'm going to select them, click on one, hold Control, click the other, right click and remove columns. Don't need those. Now, because I came from a CSV file here, it has assumed that the first row is headers, which it's not. Karine is not a header, that's one of the staff members. So earlier on, I did an example where I put the first row as a header, and now I want the opposite. There is a drop-down list next to the button to use first row as headers, where I can use the headers as the first row, so I can demote them. So that drops it down. I have ridiculous header names now, but I need Karine. She's data. She's not a header, she's data. And I have these stupid other headers now. Now, another thing that we saw earlier is in the first example, I used a button called fill to fill down the dates. I want to do the same thing here with these names. So if I click on column 1, come to transform, fill down, just like earlier, but nothing happened. I can see the M code here. So it did happen, it did fill. And if I look over on the right, oh, there's the step, fill down. It did fill, but it obviously didn't work. Now in Power Query, there is no undo button at the top, but your undo button is to delete a step. So that filled down step, I'll press the black X to delete it. Let's try that again. Delete it, and that is undo. So it worries people when they look up and go, oh no, there's no undo. There is, but it's called deleting steps. Now the problem here is that those cells have been recognized as blank. If I go to the filter arrow, blank, there are blank cells. Whereas over in the column 4, there's null values. They're recognized as null, and they're not the same. A blank cell and a null value are not the same. A blank cell is like in Excel, where you put the 2 quotes to make it look blank, but it's not actually blank. There's empty string in there. That's them. And that's why the fill didn't work. They're not fully null. So I'm going to click on column 1 and use good old trusty replace values. Home tab, replace values, replace nothing, replace blank with null, click OK. Fills them with null values. Now I can come to transform, fill down, and now it works. Didn't like the blank cells, wants null values. So a little bit of extra work needed there. Now I'm using the filter in column 3 because I want the job names, but I do not need that ridiculous header thing. I don't need blanks, and I don't need the total that I received. We'll calculate that. We don't need that total. Click OK. And this is pretty much the information I've got. Name of the staff, date they travelled, what job, how far. Exactly what I want. Let's rename them. Name, date, job, and mileage. Check the data types, text. Oh, the date is text. Ah, that's interesting. Okay. Now, if I come in and choose date, oh, errors. This is called a profiler at the top, by the way. They're going red. Give me a little warning. Didn't work. Oh, it worked for some of them, not others. Let me come over to the applied steps and delete the change type step. That didn't work. Now, what do you think is odd about those dates? Well, it's not odd, you know what I mean. The locale is wrong. I got an error because they're looking at the 1st of the 23rd. Doesn't make sense. It's not 23 months. You can't have the 1st of the 23rd. They're in a US format. So I'm going to click on the data type button, use locale. This should open up a locale window. Here we come. The data type is a date. Lots of good data types in there. Locale, and I get this massive list. Oh, crikey. I've got to scroll down and look for English UK or any other country that will put it in that format for me. Quick tip, easiest way of getting to English UK or English US, if you needed those, is to type F. Obviously English doesn't start with F, but UK and US, because they start with a U, are always towards the end of the English. But you'd find your country. If you needed France, if you needed Nigeria, you'd go and find what you need. Grab that, click OK. I didn't envisage this problem, if I'm honest. Okay, I'll have to deal with that another way. Let me just come out of that for now. Okay, I'll deal with that in the text file. For now, I'll just leave it as text. I won't use it in my reports. I didn't expect that problem. But good to know about the locale anyway. Although it didn't work in that scenario, terrific to work. It seems to really be struggling with the fact that it's a date. Yeah. Okay, next one is text though. Last one, that's an alphanumeric whole number for the mileage. In this example, it's whole number. The main reason for this example I'm doing right now is I want to show how to group data and I want to show referencing. So over on the left, we have this queries pane, and I've got one query group by, and we've connected to the source, the text file, brought it in, done some transformations to this point. We now need two reports. I'm being asked for a report, total mileage by name, each person traveling, and total mileage by job. Two different reports, two different pivot tables. Now I've taken this query as far as it can go, because what I now want to do is right click on the query on the left and reference that query. So this query ends and I've got another query linking to it. So I don't want to duplicate it, that would work as well, but I don't want to duplicate all of those steps. There's no need. Those steps can happen once and then two reports come off it. By reference to get another one, and then right click again and reference for another one. I'm going to rename these by name and by job. And I'll start with the by name one. So if I look on the right hand side, all they've got is that link to the source as a step. And if I look in the M code, it's just a simple, a little bit like an Excel formula, just a link back to that other query. So that query does all of those steps rather than me copying them all and doing them twice. Now with the name selected, name column selected, on the home tab is a group by button. That's it, just like a pivot table where you summarize what's in the rows. If I click group by, got lots of advanced settings and that in here as well. But from basic, it's got name because I had that selected, name of the column, total mileage is what I'm trying to find out. Operation, good functions in here. Count distinct's pretty cool. You've got things like median as well, things that pivot tables can't do. I'll use sum, which they can do, obviously. And I'm going to sum the mileage column. So for every name, sum up the mileage. So when I click OK, I get just those two columns. So I've kind of created a pivot table report. That's what I'm trying to demonstrate. Then we change that data type to a whole number. I can now come over to by job and do a similar thing. I'm going to select job column, group by, the job, total mileage. Oop. Oh, did it again. What's going on? Sum the mileage. Click OK. There's my second one. I can even sort these columns if I want. I could sort the mileage descending, so the jobs with the biggest mileage are at the top. And if I go back to the name query, maybe I'll sort that one A to Z by the name. Excellent. And I've got two reports, if you want to call them that, coming from that original query. Close and load too. Now these are the finished article, so I'm just going to bring them in as tables. I don't need a pivot table or anything like that. New worksheet, okay. And it brings in all three queries. At the moment, I'm on a sheet 4, which has got the report for the job. I've got a sheet 3, which has got the report for the name. And then I've got a sheet 2, which has actually got the, what do we call it, group by query. Now, it's not doing any harm. Maybe it's doing good because I could use that in more calculations and more Excel fun. But let's imagine I don't need that query in the sheet. I used Power Query to create these two reports from that data. I don't need that data in a sheet. That's why I use Power Query, so that I wouldn't do that. So because that's the case, over on the right-hand side, if I right mouse click on Group By, I can change the load to settings. It brings up that window that we've seen a few times today. There it is, when I'm zoomed in. And for that one, I don't want the table. I'm going to say only connection. Keep that query in the connection, but the other two, the reports, yes, I'll load those into the worksheet, but I don't need the data dump, if you want to call it that, in the worksheet. I could put it in the model, but I'm not doing any Power Pivot stuff on that. So if I click OK, I get a warning that I've got a table in this workbook from that query. Oh, I'm going to delete the table. Okay, no problem. That's why I'm doing it. And that table that was on sheet 2 has now disappeared. But that's good. I don't want it. I've still got my 2 reports on separate sheets. If I want them on the same sheet, it always by default puts them on different sheets. I wish it asked, but never mind. But from sheet 4, nice quick little technique. If I select that pivot table, grab the edge to drag it. As I drag it to the bottom, to the sheets, it doesn't let me drag it onto sheet 3. If I hold down the Alt key, Alt, Alt, it then lets you change sheets where you drag. So from here, I can just dump it for the moment. So I'm struggling with my mouse a little bit and then just drag it into space. So I could have just cut and paste it, but it's cool that when you drag, you can hold down Alt and it allows you to switch into a different sheet directly from dragging. It's a nice little shortcut. And I've finished up with my 2 reports. Just a quick demo of using Power Query, not just for its classic job of connecting to a source, cleaning data, and then giving it to the model or the pivot table. That's really what its job is, but using it also to generate the report without the pivot table, without Power Pivot. Because if you just want a simple list like this, then that can do it. And it's going to save a lot more space on your spreadsheet than using a pivot table would, you know, or writing multiple formulas and stuff would. If that's something you have to consider, you know, the speed of your spreadsheet's operation and that. If that's a consideration, these are things worth thinking about. If it's not, then just do the way that's easier for you. There's no point doing it the hard way if you don't need that those technical skills. Excellent. Shall we go to questions? If that's okay.
Yeah, there are some. Yeah, there are some.
How shall we handle this? Do you want to?
Name, you can see the questions. I have. You're able to see that?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want me to answer them verbally or just on the thing?
Verbally will be better, so that everybody will be benefited.
Cool. Oh, there's lots. Or shall I put them in?
Shall I read it for you?
Yeah, sure.
Few members asked about the link for the Power Query which I sent, and then they say that the message displayed is Microsoft Power Query for Excel is an Excel add-in that enhances the self-service business intelligence. Excel by simplifying data recovery.
Sorry,
Note the Microsoft Power Query add-in for Excel 2010/2013 is
okay
by Microsoft. Please upgrade to a newer version in Excel.
Yeah, so if I understand it correctly, Power Query came out in 2013 as an add-in. So you can, you know, if you Google Power Query, you can find the add-in to install that way. But from 2016, it became a standard part of, I think it was 16, pretty confident it became a standard part of Excel. And if anybody's got 365, then you've got everything. There's a lot of stuff which Microsoft
for everybody's benefit. 2010 and 13, it's a download feature. It is very much available. You can download it. I just tried it, it worked. And for 2000, it became an inbuilt feature.
Cool. Oh, actually, I can see. Yeah, you put some links in.
The next one, yeah. You can see the query, please.
Yeah, I've just seen the links over there. Cool.
Is there any size cap for the data combined? I don't know what that means.
Where's this? I can't see this question.
1904.
Oh, I see.
Chairman, I think it'll be better if you read out the question and then Alan answers it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
is there any
no,
size cap for the data combined? I
No.
think that is a very specific question to some of the data. Is there any size cap for the data? No.
No.
Okay.
The only
Next is-
size, I guess, will be on your machine, you know,
Okay.
where it's 32-bit or 4-bit, all that stuff.
Yeah. Can we do all the functions of pivot such as grouping, table format, etc. in Power Pivot and model-based reports?
Yes.
Yes, as asked. Okay,
Yeah.
yes. Hello, Mr. Allen. How is this tool different from Power BI? Arun Kumar Kapali has asked.
Yeah. They're extremely similar. So Power BI has Power Query and Power Pivot in it. So the when you use Power BI to get data from another source, that is Power Query working under the hood. And when you're doing the modeling with the relationships, that's Power Pivot under the hood. Now, Power BI does normally have a little bit more options though than Power Pivot. So the different connectors they've got a lot more connectors. They've also got some DAX functions in Power BI that you don't have in Power Pivot. So it does have a little bit more, but it is the same, if that makes sense. Power Pivot is just, I guess, doesn't have quite as many, but the good thing is it works like 98% the same. There are some tiny differences, but not enough to worry about, I wouldn't think. Like if you can use Power Pivot here, you'll have no problem doing the same thing in Power BI and vice versa. But Power BI's got much better visuals. That's the key thing.
Next one is from C.A. Puttalingam. He says, ask the speaker to explain the areas in which we can use our work, audit or financial statement analysis.
Well, something like Power Query, I say everybody can use that in their work. So you're getting wherever you get the data from that you're auditing and creating the statements. That's, I mean, if you get it in Excel, great, or that might be lots of different Excel files. But Power Query's job to get that data and combine it into one if you need to, and just to clean, do like typical Excel cleaning up jobs, like removing duplicates, formatting things, which is the data type in Power Query, concatenating, splitting. It doesn't have to be difficult stuff, but Power Query is more adept at doing this than the various features of Excel is. I mean, Excel's got Flash Fill now, which came out in 2013, which is brilliant for this stuff. But I guess Power Query is the main tool.
Okay. A data field could have delimited at the very beginning. I think that was on the example which you are working and that date column. So somebody said that could have had a delimited table. The next one, if changes are made in group by query, will data change in total mileage sheet and job sheet automatically? Alternatively, if changes are made in parent data, do the change automatically reflect in child sheets?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so that Power Query was linking to the CSV file called group by. So if anybody changed that CSV file, so I could try and do that now if you want, or if they edit the query, then all this stuff will be reflected. Let me see if I can, if you don't mind, do an example. Got so much stuff open. What am I doing? PQ and PP. So this is the CSV file that it created it from. So let's see if I can mess it up a bit. Is that the structure? Yeah. Let's put me in there. Let's try and change something around. Job 99. New job 99. 100 miles. That number's going to be wrong now, but we don't need it, so nobody cares. Is this going to let me save it? It's telling me to sign in again, so I don't know if this saving is working. Let's find out. Back here, I should be able to refresh all this stuff. And there's job 99, and there's me, top of the tree.
Yeah.
Yes, everything works. Somebody's just changed that origin file and the refresh. Yeah, the 3 queries. The group by went in, did its transformations, and then the 2 reports refreshed off that.
One CA Kumar is asking, how do I replicate the same query to different folders?
So I'm just trying to find that. Oh, duplicate folders. So is it? Did I hit it right? Duplicate. Oh yes. How do I replicate some query to different folders? Okay, yes. So probably the best bet is move that over there. If I go back into the query editor, so there's a few different ways of doing that. I could click on data, get data, launch Power Query Editor, and that would just reopen Power Query with the queries that I've already got. And what you would probably do, what I would do, is on the Home tab, we have this Advanced Editor button. Now this might look a bit scary depending on people's background, because it's going to show us the M code. And I'm I've got the by name selected at the moment. That's the wrong query. Or we might want that one as well. But what I wanted was the group by one. If I select group by, advanced editor, here we go. So it might look a little bit scary, but I would just take a copy of all of that stuff. So take a copy of all that code. I would, this is one way anyway, start up a brand new query. So in other sources, they have a blank query option. And in any advanced editor, you could just paste that in there. So it's just like copying like VBA code or something. You have the file path here. So we could come in and change that file path so it links to the correct folder. The only other thing you might have to consider is that I can see it reference names of people here, because Karine was a header in this example. Your example might not have to worry about that, but in this example, Karine was a header, which we demoted. There's us demoting it. So you might have to consider things like that. But the key thing is that we could just copy and paste the code and just divert that folder to the correct place. You can also, sorry, carrying on with that question, if I just click on done, talking about editing that file path, which is great, things like that I could also do. You see that query's working fine over here in the applied steps, because not all of the steps get one, but some of the steps have a little gear icon on the right, little cog. And if I click on the one for source, it just opens up that nice window so I can go and browse for the other file. So you don't have to get, stuck in typing in like a file path or something horrible. You've got a nice user-friendly window where I can just come and browse for the new folder, select that folder, and let it write it for me. And I can also edit any of the other steps. You know, if some of the steps weren't quite right, if I don't need to demote headers, I can just delete it. And it might not be exactly what you want, but yes, you can copy your queries and point them to other folders, or yeah, that's a way. Let's go that. Excellent. The question about the size of the workbook with the Power Queries. I don't know the specifics, like numbers to quote, but compared to features like conditional formatting, they're tiny. They won't take up much space at all. Conditional formatting is amazing, but that's typically one of the culprits of adding weight to files that struggle. There's people putting too much of that in, and other things as well. You know.
Yeah,
So
there's one more question. Is it possible to convert ununiform text data to Excel using Power Query table facilities, where the data is ununiform?
Yes, when you say ununiform, so it's just like there's irregularities in the structure. So this mean, I mean, yes, the steps you'd have to perform, I guess, would depend on how ununiformed it is. But there's some brilliant, you know, some really useful settings in there. Things that I didn't get to show today, like merge queries and unpivot. And in the split, there was the options for like leftmost and digit to non-digit. You've also got extract options as well. So in Excel, you have functions like right and mid and find and things like that. In Power Query, there's a button called extract, which has got all those settings, like text between characters or text after the fourth character.
If I may add to that question,
Yeah.
Alan, I think very often when we are working with some data that we export from some other software or you know, some of the backup that we see, what happens is if it's a numbers column, some of the content is in numbers, some of them is in text. So there are spaces now that even if we try to trim it using the function on Excel, we always struggle to have uniform data. So if we use this tool, does it automatically do that, or do we have to, you know, clean it first before we use it?
You still have to clean it. So when Power Query sees it, they'll try and do the change type step, and they might be able to do it, but they also might not, because we'll have the mixture of number and text. It will just go with one of them. We'll probably go with text. Just go, right, it's all text, and then we'll either change the data type or do something to convert it. But yeah, we'll still have to clean it to an extent. Yeah. The joy is.
Right, Alan, thank you so much. In fact, we have covered almost all the queries. I think now for want of time, maybe we'll write a mail, and there are a lot of queries which have come that you should do it in our local GST data. We'll try to definitely do some session where we can use the Power Query using the local data also.
Yes.
Vishek, over to you for thanking our Alan.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alan, for a really, really wonderful presentation. You were able to take us through a live presentation on your Excel screen as to how you're doing it. I think many of our members were trying it out at their home system as and when you were doing it, and you could see that from the questions that you were asking. It is always very nice, you know, having a live case study instead of just simply listening. Able to perform it is always interesting. So thank you so much, Alan, taking time out of your schedule. And I know it must be the afternoon there. And despite that, you spent some time with us. Thank you once again. And I'd like to thank the chairman of SIRC for initiating what was normally not done, where we get an internationally renowned speaker to come and, you know, spend time with our members. So hats off to you, chairman. Thank you for organizing this program. Of course, thanks to Chengal Reddy, council member. He's not there now, but he was there in the opening. And thanks to all the members who have joined us today. We have also planned for some future meetings. Should I announce the meetings now, Chairman?
Yeah, we can please quickly. You can do that quickly.
Yes. So we have some future meetings planned on 29th of May at 10 a.m. We have a seminar on how to set up an international tax practice from scratch by CA Namman Shrimal. Very important session because now we are expecting a lot of foreign FDI will come in, new companies will be set up. So how to set up an international tax practice from scratch for all practitioners. This is not for big people, for anyone to how to set it up. On 30th of May, we have GST impact on charitable trust and the construction industry. We have the reputed CA Ganesh Prabhu who's speaking. And on 31st of May, we have future of work and the impact of the CA profession, the future of CA profession, where CAV Pattabhiram, sir, he'll be taking the session. All three sessions are scheduled to start at 10 a.m. on 29th, 30th, and 31st of May. We request all the interested participants to register and join the program. So thank you all for joining us today. And once again, thank you, Alan, and thank you, Chairman.
Yeah,
Thank
my
you.
special thanks to CA Deepak again for the cost of reputation. It is because of him we were able to kind of have a wonderful program and have Alan Murray with us. So thank you so much.